10 months in the deadliest country on earth. Long enough to learn the sound a rifle safety makes when a man forgets to keep his thumb on it. Long enough to smell a cooking fire 100 meters off, to feel a trail that has gone too quiet, to wake at the wrong kind of silence. You have earned every single day you are still breathing. Then, a helicopter drops a stranger into your squad. 18 years old, fresh from a base back in the world. His boots are still black. His gear rattles when he walks. He talks too loud. He lights a cigarette after dark because nobody has taught him yet that a cigarette after dark can end a whole platoon. And within 3 days, one of the most dangerous things in that jungle will not be the enemy. It will be him. The men who survived Vietnam had a name for the replacement who had just stepped off the chopper. They called him the FNG, the fucking new guy. And the reason they hated him was not cruelty, it was arithmetic. Standing next to a new man was, by the cold math of that war, one of the fastest ways to get killed. This is why. The strange part is that the United States Army built the fucking new guy on purpose. In the Second World War, a man shipped out with his division and stayed with it. He fought until the war ended, until he was wounded, or until he was dead. That system ground men down, but it also meant the soldier lying beside you in the dark had been lying beside you for months. He knew your breathing. He knew your voice. He knew, without a word, exactly what you would do when the shooting started. Vietnam threw all of that away. The Army rotated soldiers as individuals, not as units. 12 months in country for the Army, 13 for the Marines. 365 days, and a wake-up. Every man arrived alone on his own clock, and every man left alone on his own clock. A rifle squad was never a fixed team. It was a doorway that men walked through, one at a time, some of them staying long enough to become good at it, some of them not staying long at all. The American advisor John Paul Vann described what that produced in a single brutal sentence. The United States, he said, had not been in Vietnam for 9 years. It had been in Vietnam for 1 year, 9 times over. And every one of those years began the same way, with a stranger, with black boots, with a man who did not yet know the difference between a shadow and a firing position. You could see the cost of it on any patrol. A veteran platoon moving through triple canopy jungle went quiet, spread out, every man reading the ground, the light, the birds that stopped singing. Then, somewhere in that column, a new man would snap a branch under his boot, or cough, or ask a question at a normal speaking volume. And every experienced soldier in that line would feel the same thing crawl up the back of his neck. The feeling that the new guy had just told the whole jungle where they were. Here is what the veterans knew that the new man did not. Combat in Vietnam was overwhelmingly an ambush war. By one widely cited military analysis, something close to 88% of all engagements were started by the enemy, not by the Americans. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese chose the time. They chose the place. They opened fire from concealment at a range they had measured in advance, and then they were gone. Which meant survival did not come from courage, it came from your senses. Tim O'Brien, who was drafted and served with the 23rd Infantry Division in Quang Ngai Province, put the transformation into words better than any manual ever could. The presence of death, he wrote, has a way of bringing you fully awake. It makes things vivid. When you are truly afraid, you see things you never saw before. You pay attention to the world. That was the veteran's edge. After a few months in the bush, a man's fear had rewired him. He heard the round chambered before he consciously registered it.
He smelled the enemy, the fish sauce, the wood smoke, the sweat, before he saw a single one of them. He read a disturbed patch of earth and knew, without thinking, that something underneath it wanted to kill him. The new man had none of that, not because he was stupid, because he had not been alive long enough to learn it, and the jungle did not offer a gentle curve to learn on. It offered a cliff. Larry Speed, a combat medic who arrived to Delta Company in the 173rd Airborne, said it plainly about his first days in country. He did not know squat. He was not prepared for this. Almost no one was. The average American infantryman in Vietnam was 19 years old, and many replacements were younger. They came off an aircraft into wet heat that stole their breath, into a war that had its own language, and into a squad of exhausted strangers who looked at them and saw, first and foremost, a liability. So the veterans did the cold thing. In many units, they did not learn the new man's name. Not out of hatred, for a reason we will come back to, a reason that would haunt some of them for the rest of their lives. Now the arithmetic. The new man was dangerous in 5 specific ways, and each one had a body count attached. The first was noise. A veteran moved through the jungle like he was part of it. The new man rattled. His canteen sloshed because nobody had told him to top it off or pad it. His equipment clanked because he had strapped it on the way he strapped it on the parade ground. He stepped on branches. He whispered too loud, which in the dead silence of a night ambush carries like a shout. And the enemy was listening, always listening. The second was light. A cigarette glow at night is visible to a waiting rifleman at a shocking distance. Veterans smoked cupped under a poncho or not at all. The new man, frightened and craving something ordinary, lit up in the dark and painted a target on every face around him. The third was smell. The men who had been there stopped using scented soap, stopped using aftershave, went easy on insect repellent because they had learned the enemy could smell all of it. The Americans knew this cut both ways. They built a machine for it, a handheld chemical sniffer, carried on patrol and slung under helicopters, designed to detect the ammonia in human sweat and urine and find hidden troops. If your own army was building a device to smell the enemy did not need a device to smell a new man doused in drugstore cologne. That is 3 ways to die, and the new man usually managed all 3 in his first week. The fourth was movement. Under stress, frightened men bunch up. They drift toward each other for comfort. And bunching up, in that war, was a way to turn 1 grenade, 1 mortar round, 1 command-detonated mine into 3 dead men instead of 1. Veterans kept their spacing without being told. The new man closed the gap every time, because every instinct in a terrified body says get closer to the others. The fifth was the one that killed the most quietly, the ground itself. Mines and booby traps were the signature weapon of the Vietnam War, and they were an FNG's blind spot in its purest form. Consider the numbers, and consider them carefully, because they are real. According to the U.S. Army's own medical history of the war, covering 1965 to 1970, roughly 15 out of every 100 American soldiers wounded were hit by mines and booby traps. During 1965, in the Marine areas of operation, mines and traps accounted for as much as 70% of casualties. 70 out of 100. Not from a firefight, not from a charging enemy, from the ground. And the traps were engineered with a cruelty that the new man could not comprehend until he saw it. Many were built not to kill, but to maim, to blow off a foot, to shred a leg, because a wounded man screaming stops an entire patrol. He ties up 2 more men to carry him. He draws in a rescue that the enemy has already zeroed for a second device. A great many of these traps were made of bamboo and fishing line, which no metal detector on Earth could find. A veteran walked that ground reading it like text. The odd color of the dirt, the vine that did not belong, the single leaf pinned by a wire an inch off the trail. The new man walked that same ground, seeing only jungle, right up until the moment the jungle went off. This is the whole horror in one image. 2 men walking the same trail. One of them survives it because he has learned to see what is invisible. The other one has not learned it yet, and in this war, the tuition was paid in feet and legs and lives, and not always his own. Nowhere was the danger sharper than at the front of the column, the point. In many units, the new man was put on point almost immediately. In the 199th Infantry Brigade, the Red Catchers, cherries were made to walk point within their first days in country. It was described as part of breaking them in. Point man is the most exposed job in infantry warfare. The first man into the ambush, the first man over the trap, the man the enemy shoots first to stop the whole element. To hand it to the least experienced soldier in the unit sounds insane. It was not, entirely. Some units did the opposite and forbade new men from ever walking point, precisely because they got everyone killed. But where it happened, the logic was as cold as everything else in that war. If a new man was going to make a fatal mistake, better he make it out front, where he was the only one standing in the blast, than in the middle of the column, where his mistake took everyone with him. Think about what that says about how the veterans saw him. The safest place to put the new man was the place most likely to get the new man killed. And the danger did not stop with the enlisted men. It came with rank. In 1970, a young lieutenant named James McDonough, a West Point graduate, was flown out to take command of a platoon in Bravo Company, 4th Battalion, 503rd Infantry, of the 173rd Airborne. He landed at dusk at an isolated position and walked toward the officer he was there to replace, hand out, ready to introduce himself the way you would at any new job. The other lieutenant motioned, sharply, for him to get down. That silent gesture was McDonough's first lesson in country, delivered in the first seconds. Stand up straight in the wrong place, and you die, and the man reaching to shake your hand dies with you. It was also, McDonough would learn, the last competent thing that outgoing lieutenant did for him, because the man had spent his entire tour avoiding combat, and had taught his platoon almost nothing worth keeping. A green officer was, in some ways, worse than a green rifleman. He did not just endanger himself, he gave the orders. A new lieutenant fresh from officer training, eager to prove himself, could march a whole company into terrain a veteran sergeant would have refused to enter. The men knew it. It is why experienced non-commissioned officers so often ran the platoon in everything but name until the new officer either learned fast or did not. Karl Marlantes, who earned the Navy Cross as a Marine lieutenant with the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, later wrote about that exact terror. Not the fear of dying, the fear of being responsible for other men's dying, before you have the faintest idea what you are doing. It is the specific nightmare of the new officer, that the first thing you will ever teach your men is how to bury one of their own because of your mistake. Now turn it around and look at it through the eyes of the enemy, because they understood the FNG problem perfectly. They built their entire way of fighting around it. There is no captured order in any archive that reads, "Hunt the green units first." It did not need to be written down. Viet Cong and North Vietnamese doctrine already told them to strike from concealment, to hit and vanish, to trade fire only when they held every advantage. A noisy, bunched-up, careless American patrol was not just an easier target. It was the exact signal their entire method was designed to wait for. They had a phrase for how they fought the Americans up close, grabbing them by the belt, staying so near that the Americans could not call in artillery or airstrikes without killing their own. It took nerve and discipline, and it worked best against troops who did not yet know how to react to an ambush, who froze, who fired wild, who bunched instead of maneuvering. In other words, it worked best against new men. The enemy did not need intelligence reports to find the green units. The green units announced themselves, with a snapped branch, with a cigarette, with a smell of soap on the wind. The war was, in this one narrow sense, brutally fair. It read your experience off of you, and it priced you accordingly. But it would be a lie to say every veteran was safe and every new man was a walking curse. The truth is stranger and darker. Experience could curdle into something just as deadly. Salty veterans grew reckless, certain after enough near misses that they were untouchable. And at the far end of the tour came a different sickness entirely, one the Army studied and named, short-timers syndrome. As a man's Deros date, his date to go home, crept close, something in him withdrew from the fight. Anxiety rose, focus frayed. He had survived so much that the idea of dying now, with only a few weeks left, became unbearable, and the fear itself made him hesitant, brittle, dangerous in a new way. So the danger zone had two ends. Green men died because they knew nothing. Short men died because they could no longer stand to risk anything. The safest soldier in Vietnam was the one in the middle of his tour, awake, sharpened by fear, and not yet counting the days. And here is the cruel twist inside the hazing itself. Freezing out the new man, refusing to teach him, refusing to know him, was not just unkind. It was often self-defeating. The fastest way to keep a new man from getting you killed was to teach him, immediately and relentlessly, everything you knew. The units that survived best were frequently the ones that took the cherry under wing on day one. The cold shoulder felt like protection. Sometimes it was just a way of ensuring the new man stayed dangerous longer. There was another army in that war that had largely solved this problem, and the contrast is worth a moment. The Australians fought in Vietnam too, out of Nui Dat in Phuoc Tuy province. But they did something the Americans did not. Where the US rotated men one at a time through a revolving door, the Australians rotated whole battalions and folded their reinforcements, their Rios, into sections that already had cohesion. A new Australian did not arrive alone into a squad of strangers. He arrived into a team. And before he ever set foot in country, the Australian passed through the Jungle Training Centre at Canungra in Queensland, a course with a reputation for savagery, built on hard lessons carried down from the Kokoda Track in the Second World War. The point of Canungra was to narrow the gap between the new man and the veteran before the new man could get anyone killed, to turn as much of that lethal first-month learning as possible into something you survived in training instead of in combat. It was not a perfect fix, no system was, but it points straight at the real villain of this story. The FNG was never the true problem. The true problem was a policy that manufactured him, over and over, by design. Which brings us back to that quiet, terrible habit. The veterans who would not learn the new man's name. They did it because the new men died so often and so fast that knowing them was a wound waiting to happen. If you never learned his name, you never had to grieve him. You could watch a stranger get carried out and keep functioning, keep surviving, keep your own edge intact for the men who had earned a place in your memory. And then the war ended, and they went home, and they had to live with the arithmetic they had done to stay alive. Because that 18-year-old with the black boots and the rattling gear and the cigarette in the dark, the one they had refused to know, he had a mother, he had a hometown, he had exactly as much right to be remembered as any of them. And a great many veterans have spent the decades since carrying the same private ache, that somewhere in their war is a boy who died beside them, and they never even learned his name. The military eventually admitted the policy was a mistake. In the years after Vietnam, the Army moved toward keeping soldiers together, training together, deploying together, coming home together, precisely so that no man would ever again have to fight beside a stranger he had decided in advance not to love. Philip Caputo, one of the first Marines ashore at Da Nang in 1965, wrote a line about these young men that has never been improved upon. "Before you leave here," he said, "you are going to learn that one of the most brutal things in the world is your average 19-year-old American boy." He was talking about what the war made of them. But it works the other way too. Every one of those hardened veterans, every man who could read a trail and smell an enemy and hated the new guy on sight, had himself stepped off a helicopter once. Loud, clumsy, terrified. A fucking new guy that somebody once decided not to name. They all started as the thing they came to fear. The only difference between the veteran and the new man was time. And time, in Vietnam, was the one thing nobody could promise you. If you like this video, YouTube also thinks you're going to like the one on your screen right now.